and we continue that effort. In that vein, Senator Kupek showed up to help provide dual testimony here, and he's got to head back to another committee, so I'll let him do his share first, and then we'll let him go.
Wow, okay. Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Thank you, committee, for rearranging the order to allow me to scoot off to higher ed here. I did carry this bill last year, and as Senator Drazkowski said, I have been supportive of it. Particularly, he is completely the expert on all the facts and figures as to why this is so antiquated. We know, and he's going to talk, I'm sure, about Wisconsin that has done this already, and that there's really no ramifications for that. But particularly, I would just like to focus on my district because it is a very, very weird boundary that this rifle and shotgun zone goes through. So if you live in Clay County, the northern border, which is the Clay-Norman County line, makes some sense, is the border between rifles and shotguns. So if you're in Norman County, you can use a rifle hunting. If you're in Clay County, shotgun. But then as it goes to the east, instead of following county lines, it comes down State Highway 32. So if you are in the city of Hitterdal, on one side of the city, you could use a rifle, and on the other side, it's shotgun only. Then as it proceeds south, instead of even going to a county line, it hits State Highway 34 and then cuts back to the west, all the way back to the city of Barnesville. And so then from Barnesville, it then starts to follow I-94, and then it eventually goes outside of my district. So I think just in terms of clarification for people and ease to know where these boundaries are, it would make a lot more sense to do away with these boundaries and go to the entire state. It is an antiquated system. It is outdated. You know, we've got a long history here, I think, in the legislature of when we look back through legislation and we see things that are not working anymore or outdated, need to update the system. This certainly, I think, just falls into that category. And I think it would also just provide for our hunters in this state a lot more simplicity so that they could easily follow the law and not go, what, look at the map, what side of Highway 32 am I on? So particularly in my district, it's important to me that we do that, and we might as well just clear it all the way down to the southern border and be like the rest of our neighbors and much of the rest of the states in the United States. So I thank you for allowing me a little bit of time, and Senator Drazkowski is now going to lay on an amazing array of facts and figures that I know he has. So.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kupek, and I was remiss in stating we do have a quorum, and Senator Hochschild we do have online as well. So go ahead and continue with your testimony. When Senator Drazkowski is done, I've got Assistant Commissioner Meyer up first, and then former Senator Simonson second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Senate File 107, I'll just go through the bill quickly. Section 1 of the bill deliberately provides clarity and language to be certain that we have delegated to the counties the ability, if a county wants to develop its own ordinance around what types of firearms to be using within their jurisdiction around deer season. Section 2 repeals the antiquated, and if you look on the back, you will see in the appendix there the antiquated law that we have, 97B.318, that was developed in the 1940s, I believe, and I think others may talk about the origin of why we have this statute, and it was actually to do with minimizing the take on deer back then because shotguns were less effective and less accurate than rifles. And so that's the bill. We also have, I'm introducing, and I think maybe Senator Kupek also is introducing, just a straight up repeal, which is the one that we've talked about in the last two sessions and that we've worked from there. And members, that may be where we get back to. I don't know what the correct language is around this. We will get there one way or another. But to pursuit of that point, if you get a chance, members, take a look at 471.633 in our statutes. 471.633, that is our firearms preemption statute, okay? And that's the statute that says local unit of government, you can't create your own laws around firearms. And when that statute was developed, there was a compromise that said, okay, if we're going to say that local units of government can't develop their own laws around firearms. The compromise was that a government subdivision, that's included in paragraph A in that section, a government subdivision may regulate the discharge of firearms. It's very clear that cities, counties, and townships, I believe this would apply to as well, in current law, have the ability to regulate the discharge of firearms. So, and I'm trying to get this message out clearly, and I think everybody here understands that. So a municipality could say, we don't want to have rifles discharged in our municipality during the deer season. They could say that if they wanted to and pass it into ordinance already. So really, if you look at it, the language I have might be duplicative, but it's also deliberate to include it there as we have the discussion, and that's really the main reason for it there. As I mentioned, the law was passed in the 1940s. Today we have large portions of southern Minnesota with deer populations that are significantly above targeted management goals. This has provided us problems, as you know, around deer depredation, damage to agricultural crops, and we're actually paying money to, as a state, to reduce deer numbers in those areas, and they bring in sharpshooters. Of course, the sharpshooters, of course, use rifles members when they do their work because they're more precise and they're incrementally safer. So that is one thing. And then CWD, if you think about it, what contributes to the propagation of CWD is the large concentrations of animals, especially mature animals, and this would allow hopefully more interest in deer hunting in those areas, kind of maybe a new segment of people that would be able to participate in deer hunting in southern Minnesota and come where the deer are and help us reduce our numbers in the areas they need to be reduced. The research around this bill and the need for it is really included in your packets here. One is, and I've talked about this on the Senate floor before, from the Pennsylvania Assembly, a 2005 resolution, but a 2007 study. If you turn to page 43 on that, you'll see, members, the conclusion. I'll outline it for you very carefully because there's arguments about this. There's arguments about this among hunters and non-hunters alike. Which of the two types of firearms provides a greater than they call it danger zone? In other words, the area from the point of discharge from the muzzle downrange to where the projectile finally ends its travel. So which of the two travels further? A saboted slug in a rifled shotgun barrel, or a 30-06 rifled cartridge? Thank you. And so the answer is, if you are 0 degrees with the ground and level with the ground or lower, a shotgun slug goes further. And both of them will ricochet regularly, and some of those images are in this study if you want to see the details of it. And if you go to an angle that is above parallel with the ground, the rifle will end up going further. And so the argument, of course, for those of us that are advocates of this bill is when a person is discharging a firearm in a hunting environment, as shooting at an animal, they are parallel with the ground, and actually the numbers in here will tell you in the conclusion that a rifle is incrementally safer than a shotgun in those situations. And members, that's what we're talking about. Secondly, I'll go to the Wisconsin 20, and this is the updated one. I talked about this one in the past on the floor, but this is a 2023 hunter safety summary from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and you can turn to page 15 and 16 on there to the end on page 21 of the document. It shows very clearly. As a matter of fact, this year there were 0 deer hunting deaths and 1 deer hunting incident with firearms in Wisconsin. And at one point in history, it was a great deal more. Some of those are outlined in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article, which you see there. One of them is, well, I'll let you read it, members, but in 2013 is when Wisconsin went to statewide allowing rifles throughout the whole state, and they did it because it was safer. And that's outlined in here. According to 2003 DNR survey, at the time, about 76% of Wisconsin hunters used a rifle and 24% used a shotgun. Okay, 76% used a rifle, 24% used a shotgun. 42% of the hunting incidents, shooting incidents, involve shotguns in the state of Wisconsin. And members, that has happened throughout our country as some of the patchwork of states that had limitations and said you had to have shotgun-only zones or could only use shotguns to hunt deer. You'll see that on the other handout by Remington Cartridge that shows now there's 3 states in the country that don't allow some form of rifle or straight-walled cartridge. That's southern Minnesota, only half of our state, and the states of New Jersey and Massachusetts. And that's the kind of the demographics, if you will. So, members, as Senator Kupek pointed out clearly, this will create uniformity in the law for law enforcement, and it will make it easier for hunters to follow. Deer depredation damage will be reduced. This will save taxpayer dollars, and it will also help us mitigate and reduce the spread of CWD in southern Minnesota. Members, that's my bill. I don't know what the perfect bill is going forward, but I just want to repeal this antiquated statute and bring Minnesota to be one complete state in terms of deer hunting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. We do have some testifiers coming up, hoping to save questions for members to the end, but Senator Lang, did you have a question quick? Or do you want to
Yeah, I
save
guess,
this for the end?
thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a bill question actually anyways, but this kind of looks like the compromise that we came to last year with the entire repealer, that when we added that language to omit the counties that wanted to be omitted. Is that kind of the direction that this bill is taking?
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Lang, that's the spirit of what we're doing here. It's a compromise. And again, it's really not necessary because the preemption law already gives this authority to all those municipalities to not only limit discharge of shotguns during the deer season or rifles during the deer season, if that's what they want to do, which I don't know why they'd want to do it because they'd be refusing to head in a safer direction, but they have that ability in law now. So I think we just need to have the committee discussion and figure that out as we go.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Senator Lang?
Yeah, and the only follow-up I would say that is, as a committee, and hopefully the DNR has a similar standpoint, is they don't want a patchwork of counties throughout the state that have different laws, because then we're going to be in a worse situation than we are now. So however we stop that from happening, and, you know, the safety aspect for sure is important, and I think that you touching on that is important. And of course, I've been supportive of this bill in the past, and however we get it done, we just got to make sure that if there are, you know, there was 3 counties that wanted to be omitted from it, I think if they have the right to do so, they should be allowed to do so. And then taking a look at it annually, originally I thought that was maybe not such a good idea, but I think it probably is a good idea. The more I thought about it, the more you talk about county boards having, you know, citizen input and seeing some of the statistics that go along with the way you're presenting it, I think are an important thing to do. So that's kind of all I was asking about.
Perfect, thank you. With that, I think we'll invite up Assistant Commissioner Meyer.
And Mr. Chair,
Senator Drazkowski.
if I can, while the commissioner is being seated, and he probably was going to cover this anyway, but both the language that's in Senate File 107 and the authority that the municipalities already have under the preemption statute that we talked about earlier, each of those would be a county ordinance, Senator Lang. So I'm guessing the DNR is not going to be enforcing a county ordinance, so we would not have necessarily that patchwork that we would be worried about in terms of enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome back, Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. For the record, Bob Meyer, Assistant Commissioner, Department of Natural Resources. Well, the whole first page of my talking points have already been covered by either Senator Drazkowski or Senator Lang or other members. So just a little brief history, and I want to address a couple other points. As we've talked about or previously, the origin of limiting deer hunters to the use of shotguns goes back to 1942, when deer populations were starting to recover from overharvest. Restricting hunters to shotguns with limited ranges was one way to protect the deer in an open agricultural landscape. Today's deer population management relies on limiting what hunters can harvest, and the need to restrict how now is not necessary. Eliminating the shotgun zone would simplify regulations for hunters and would allow actions to be taken, follow actions by Wisconsin to allow rifles for deer hunting statewide, and Iowa has done the same just in the past decade or so. The issue of safety often comes up during this discussion. Ultimately, the safety of hunters rests with the individual hunter, knowing how to safely handle a gun, confirming what the target is, and knowing what is beyond your target, which are just a few of the firearm safety principles. Thanks to required firearm safety training for hunters, deer hunting accidents involving guns have dramatically declined, and the most likely way to be hurt hunting today involves climbing in and out of a deer stand. We do have concerns about a bifurcated system, and the county ordinance question is a good one, that our officers enforce state law, counties enforce county ordinances, but working with the counties, making sure people understand the safety issues and the population management issues. Deer depredation was brought up. We will be discussing that this session, as there are concerns many of our agricultural producers of the deer damage being inflicted on their crops, and this would provide another tool to allow that to happen more effectively. The issue of non-toxic ammunition comes up. I think in firearms, there's a lot more availability for non-toxic components, copper and other types of projectiles. And then also just making sure that people understand what the rules are. That is one of our concerns, and we can work through that, but maintaining a simple, easily understandable set of regulations is critical for our outdoor enthusiasts out there. So I know there's been concerns about this in the past. I just wanted to state for the record why it was put into place, and we will work with the chair and the legislature on this bill. We'd like to see something taken care of.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. And again, we'll hold questions till we get through the testifiers. Next, we have Eric Simonson. After Senator Simonson, we will have Brian Martinson and then Rob Dorr. Welcome back. Good to have you at the Environment Committee again. You know the drill, so I don't have to tell you what to do. Just go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Herr and members of the committee. My name is Eric Simonson. I represent the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. We are an association of over 11,000 plus members across the state, men, women, and youth, who are excited about deer hunting and the future of deer hunting. We are an organization that was created by hunters and for hunters, and for the last 40 plus years, it has been building a hunting and conservation legacy through habitat, education, and advocacy. We want to express our gratitude to Senator Drazkowski and others who have worked on this bill over a number of years for carrying this year Senate File 107, and express our full support of this bill as we have done several years in the past. We also very much appreciate Senator Drazkowski's willingness to dig in and find a solution to what seems to have been the stumbling block for this bill in years past, in that it explicitly clarifies that counties retain the ability to limit firearms for deer hunting within their own jurisdictions. We believe that that's provided under current law, but the fact that it shows up here in this bill, I think, reiterates that fact and hopefully provides some comfort to those counties that perhaps have concerns. We believe it is not the state statute that should exclude or include counties. Rather, it is the local government that has the authority to make those decisions. I saw a letter in your packet today from a county board requesting an exemption from the proposed change. We believe, thankfully, that Senate File 107 addresses that exact concern by making it clear that the county may adopt their own ordinance, accomplishing exactly what they believe is responsible for their own county. It allows for public testimony and conversations at one of the most effective forms of government, that being local. You have heard a lot today about the reasons to support this bill, and I'm not going to repeat that. reasons which the MDHA agrees with and has advocated for several years. Let me just reiterate one incredibly important point that was referenced in another letter in your packet from the Bluff Country chapter of the MDHA. The fact that the reason the shotgun zone was put into place originally was not due to safety concerns, but to make it more difficult to harvest deer. And you heard that same testimony today from the DNR. Given the deer populations we are seeing in this part of the state now, it is logical to support this change going forward. Rifles are simply safer than shotguns. The evidence in other states supports this. We want to thank Senator Drazkowski and members of the committee for your consideration of this bill, and we will continue to be a willing resource as the bill moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Next up, we have, again, Brian Martinson, then after him, Rob Dorr. Welcome, Mr. Martinson. Go ahead and state your name for the record and go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Brian Martinson. I'm the Environment and Natural Resources Policy Analyst for the Association of Minnesota Counties. Our association represents all 87 of Minnesota's counties. AMC does not have a position on the repeal of the shotgun zone provisions that are contained in this bill. And we're appreciative of the recognition that some counties do have issue with that in clarifying the ability through ordinance to restrict the discharge of firearms. Our primary issue with the proposal here in Senate File 107 is the language contained on lines 1.11 through 1.13 that would require an expiration and annual readoption of the ordinance. This is not a requirement of other ordinances and actions by the county. County commissioners will, in adopting the ordinance in its original state, be hearing from the public and have an opportunity for public input. County commissioners live in their districts. They regularly meet monthly within the county and have close contact to their populations. They will be able to hear and understand from the public if there's a desire to revisit this issue and have the ability at any time to do so and reconsider whether the ordinance is right for their communities. So I would be happy to take any questions, and that wraps up my testimony.
Thank you. Please stick around for questions if there are any. There's two more testifiers. Next up, we have Rob Dorr, and then after that, we have Anthony Newman online. Welcome, Mr. Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chair Herr, members of the committee. I'm Rob Dorr with the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. Testifying, I guess, mostly in support of this bill. I won't rehash some of the history with the DNR's reasoning behind the historical adoption of this provision. A couple things I want to talk about are the practical aspects. Now, with the advent of technology, we have rifles, shotguns that are chambered like rifles in rifle caliber, or with rifling in the barrels, detachable magazines and bolt actions that perform nearly identical to rifles. On the other end, we have handguns, which are also legal in shotgun zones, that mirror the ballistic performance of many different types of deer rifles. So technology has caught up to a point where this distinction is arbitrary. Furthermore, people are able to target shoot on their property year-round. So in Olmsted County, somebody can target shoot with a rifle year-round on their property without any concern here. But if they crawl up into their deer stand and instead of hunting a coyote or shooting a target, they're shooting at a deer, now they're in violation of current state law. So I think with the advent of technology and there's just really no efficacy to maintaining this provision. The safest way for somebody to shoot a gun is to shoot a gun that they're comfortable with, that they can shoot accurately, and that they can shoot safely. For a lot of people, that's a rifle. But now you're telling them for a couple weeks out of the year, they have to trade in their rifle for a shotgun that they're less familiar with, that they can't manage as well. Now, deer hunters do this, but the question is to what really government purpose is this serving at this point? I'd also just encourage you to flip the page over and look at the map lines there and just how confusing that is for members of the public to understand. But also this has caused confusion with DNR officers. We have members who regularly contact us that are shooting a pistol in a rifle caliber or a rifle or a shotgun that's in a rifle type configuration, but is still by every letter of the law a shotgun, who've had their guns confiscated by DNR officers, or they've been detained for unreasonable amounts of times while the DNR officers, the conservation officers, try to ascertain whether or not the firearm is legal. It's causing a lot of harassment, a lot of confusion, and there's literally nothing you can point to as a rational basis for maintaining this. And finally, I want to address the concerns of counties that want to be carved out. Traditionally, that's been a poison pill in this bill. It's garnered large support. It's gotten onto the House and Senate floor, and then certain counties want to be exempted, and that's caused the bill to not advance. As has been pointed out ad nauseum at this point, current law permits every single county the ability to regulate the discharge of firearms. So if they want to pass an ordinance, they have every ability to do that. There's zero need for them to be carved out within the law. So to that extent, I don't oppose what Senator Drazkowski has on subdivision 7 here from lines 1.9 to 1.13, but we would generally just favor a general repealer and let counties use the existing authority that they already have.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Last up on our testifier list is Mr. Newman, who's online. I can't see if is he on there?
Yes.
Is he? Okay, perfect. Mr. Newman, just go ahead and unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and then go ahead and state your name for the record and get started.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you. Go ahead.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and also for the opportunity to do it via Zoom, because I'm on the road, as you can probably see, if you can see my face. So I appreciate that opportunity. So my name is Anthony Newman, and I'm a resident of Chatfield, Minnesota, which is in Olmsted County. And so I have a prepared statement. I'm going to try to part back because the other speakers have done such an excellent job of sharing some of the very same statistics. So for fear of complete redundancy, I'll try to part that back for you guys. But I'm in support of the elimination of the shotgun-only deer hunting in southern Minnesota. And I am supportive of it for 3 reasons. And first is, of course, you've heard a lot of data already on this, that based on the data and the facts, rifles are simply safer than shotguns. The data is clear on that. We, of course, already learned that while only 24% of the hunters use shotguns in Wisconsin, they accounted for 42% of the hunting incidents. So it's clearly disproportionately high amount with the shotguns. And so when Wisconsin switched over, you've heard that the safety went up significantly. Over the last decade, it's been the safest deer hunting in the history of Wisconsin. I would like to see that same thing occur in Minnesota. Interestingly, the shotgun-only zones in Wisconsin were the most highly densely populated areas. And so Wisconsin was trying to do the right thing. And they thought that by going with shotgun only, it would be safer for the citizens. Once they did a review of the data over a 10-year period, they found that exactly the opposite was true. And so when they repealed the shotgun-only zones, safety continued to increase as more and more hunters. So you heard about so for these reasons, there were some 2022 state shotgun-only legislation, and as already mentioned, there are only 3 remaining because the states were more concerned about the safety of their citizens than about an antiquated policy on use. So I think that's really important. The second reason, which I think is also very important, is I'm a very ethical and humane hunter. Rifles are simply a better way to promote ethical hunting practices and to minimize unnecessary suffering and loss of game. Now, I know that technology has advanced with other types of firearms, but The reality is shotguns are far less accurate, and as a result, you don't get as clean a kill, as fast a kill. And with the rifle, which is far more accurate, you're able to prevent unnecessary suffering of animals. And that's something that breaks my heart down here in southern Minnesota as I see this happen over and over again. When you have a more accurate weapon, you're able to get a much cleaner kill. You don't have unnecessary suffering. And then you don't have animals wander off and just die where you can't recover that animal. In my own hunting party this past year, there's 6 of us. There were 2 deer that were unrecovered. And this is, unfortunately, happens far too often. The third reason, and this was also spoken to, is the laws in Minnesota is old and antiquated. The original intent was to protect deer in the open range. We don't need to protect deer in the open range any longer. We really need to control the population. And allowing for rifles, which are far more accurate, is a much better way of harvesting deer and much more effective way, which is something that we definitely need in southern Minnesota. So in closing, this issue really is not about politics. It's about safety, it's about ethics, and it's about practicality. And legislators, law enforcement, sheriffs, who first of all prioritize safety in southern Minnesota, who support humane deer hunting practices, and third, endorse common sense policies that reflect today's needs, should fully support the elimination of the shotgun-only zones in Minnesota. Now, I'm also familiar with the opposition letter from Olmsted County, and I happen to be a resident in Olmsted County.
If you could wrap it up real quick, Mr. Newman, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm at the end. I'm a resident of Olmsted County. And if we can see that the data and the statistics show that it's safer, the letter of opposition actually states that they're concerned about the safety. So if we're concerned about safety, then people should endorse this rather than oppose it. By holding on to the older shotgun only, we're actually promoting a less safe environment for the citizens of Olmsted County. So, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Thank you, Mr. Newman. Make sure to shut your microphone back off. That's all we have for testifiers, so if there's any questions from members, we would like to entertain that now. I've got Senator McEwen first, and Senator Westrom, I have you second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the A1 amendment.
All right, Senator McEwen offers the A1 amendment. Is it simple enough where you're able to just start describing it as they pass it out? Perfect.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Chair, this does go to the issue that we have been sort of discussing ad nauseum, and that is the role of what power do counties have to be able to control in their jurisdiction the application of this law, this change. This amendment would alter the subdivision 7 language contained in the bill, doing away with the language after notice in a public hearing on line 1, and deleting everything after the period on line 11, and then deleting lines 12 and 13. So really, hearing the discussion today, as I'm understanding it, there is an opinion that the counties already do have the power to be able to make laws in their jurisdictions around these issues. And the language as it is now, to me, provides more limitations in terms of envisioning that it would only be, they could pass an ordinance with some after notice at a public hearing that is presumably sort of over and above the normal notice in a hearing that county boards across our state engage in their normal processes, and then also is only effective for 1 year, so they'd have to keep doing this year after year after year as the language is currently stated in the bill. So this amendment would streamline it a little bit more, make it easier for counties to go ahead and take those actions. And this amendment was brought to me by advocates from Olmsted County, and so I'd like to offer it.
All right, the A1 amendment has been offered and is in front of us. Senator Drazkowski, have you received the amendment and had a chance to look over it?
I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, and you get first comment to it then.
Yeah, I would say this is, it could be interpreted, the language, Senator McEwen, as a limitation on the county board, but it's an opportunity for citizens to actually be heard. And I think whatever we do here, whether it's this bill or some others, we should do everything we can for the citizens of the state to be heard in their government, whether it's the state government, the county government, the city government, the township government. We should err on the side of requiring the government to hear people than taking away the opportunity for people to be heard. And for that reason, I'm not in favor of the amendment. Now, I'd be, I'm open for discussion on the rest of it. Maybe we take the last sentence or two off, but I think where we talk about re-upping it, but certainly we need to be able to hear from the people, and the county board needs to pass it with notice and public hearing.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Senator McEwen?
Thank you very much, and thank you for that response, Senator Drazkowski. I would just note that the language, a county board may adopt an ordinance is still there. I think we would all agree that our county boards, when they adopt an ordinance, have requirements under the law for notice and public hearings and input as it is now, unless you're trying to assert that our counties currently don't do that when they pass ordinances. They don't have public input, they just do it. Through the normal course of what a county does, there would be that public involvement and input. I'm a little concerned that as the language as it's written now in the statute that you have makes it appear that there is some extra requirement that the county would have to go through in terms of, anyway, I think it's a little bit too restrictive, and I'd like to have the counties have this power. So, yeah, I also understand, Mr. Chair, that the plan for this bill is to be laid over, regardless of whether or not this amendment is adopted today. I wanted to make sure that it was offered, that the language is in consideration.
So as far as, Senator McEwen, thank you for that. And as far as the bills go, all three of the bills we're hearing today would normally be laid over. I don't know if there's an intent to pass it on. I know Senator Drazkowski and I had talked that there might be a path for it to move on. Senator Herr and I did not have an opportunity to talk about that ahead of time. When the similar language we heard last year for Senator Drazkowski's bill that had been mentioned, it did get laid over and continued to work on, but we did also have a floor discussion on it. So I'm certainly open to that. I think if we do want to move this on, Senator Drazkowski, Senator Herr and I should take a minute just to talk about that. But either way, it certainly could be a dual track if you want, or it could just be laid over and then still take time to work on it. So I guess I would leave that to you a little bit if you want Senator Herr and I to have a moment to chat about that. Certainly willing to do so. Otherwise, give certainly some time as well.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would urge us to lay it over with the intent of coming back and potentially voting on it after we get the language right. Work on it for a meeting or two or whatever it takes, because I think I think we can have that discussion at that point and truly work on the bill. And I'm willing to work with Senator McEwen and others in that regard. So, but I would like to take a vote out of committee and get the bill moving. But again, back to the amendment. I think we need to make certain that the citizens have that ability. Maybe, would council be able to tell us, I'm curious, under the preemption statute 471.633, if a county was going to exercise paragraph A on 471.633 and develop their own limitations for the discharge of firearms around deer season, what would their process be? Would they be required to have notice and hearing or not?
Mr. Stanley?
Mr. Chair, Senator Drazkowski, I think you've got a couple questions in there. One is about the overall way that section 471.633 interacts with the shotgun zone statute as it exists currently, or as it would exist if Senate File 107 were enacted. That's one question. Then your second question is really going to what is the process for adopting ordinances? And this is a state and local government statute, and I don't want to represent here that I know a lot about the ordinance adoption process, but my understanding is that, as Senator McEwen said, ordinances are usually adopted in open meetings that are subject to notice requirements, and I assume that the same thing would have to be done if they wanted to act under paragraph A of 471.633, that the way that a county would exercise that authority is through an ordinance in an open meeting. But if you want more than that, I really would want to go back and take a look at this, talk to our state and local government folks to figure out how these two things interact.
Senator Drazkowski, was there a follow-up to that, or is that good?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stanley. I think that leads right into the notion of if we could lay this bill over here eventually and come back in a meeting or two, and I'd be ready with an amendment to make this work in a way that works for everybody.
Perfect. Currently, we are on the A1 amendment. Is there any additional discussion to the A1 currently? No? Okay. Did you want to, since we're going to be laying the bill over, did you want to remove the A1 and get to the underlying bill? Or what was your preference?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As long as we are only laying the bill over, because I did hear Senator Drazkowski was saying he'd also like to see the bill move along a little bit ago. So I didn't know if you were thinking dual track. If it is dual track, I would like to actually take a vote on the amendment. But if we are laying it over, then I would withdraw it for discussion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, but my understanding of your comment was that we'd laid over now with the intent of taking it back up at a later point after you've had a chance to massage the language a little bit and work with counsel and Senator McEwen.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
All right, perfect. All right, so with that, the A1 amendment is withdrawn. Is there any additional questions to the underlying bill? I had Senator Westrom.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question for the last testifier, Mr. Newman, I think was his name.
I do believe Mr. Newman is still online.
Just, Mr. Newman, I note that you're from Olmsted County, and just hearing this issue over the years, it seems like Olmsted is one of those counties that has been, at least some of the county commissioners have been very opposed to this. So I'm just wondering if you've had any interaction with them, or has the county neutralize some of their concerns and opposition with more information, or what's the status of that? And if it hasn't changed, it just might be something locally you would also work with others to talk to them, because we kind of get mixed messages up here. And Olmsted's one of those counties, I believe.
Mr. Newman, are you still on, and were you able to hear that? You're still on mute, Mr. Newman.
Yeah, I'm not the one who's muting me. It's actually on your end, so thank you for unmuting me. No, I haven't had any interaction with the county commission, but I would be happy to. But I haven't had any interaction with them as yet, but I would be happy to share this very same information with them, and I'm willing to.
Senator Westrom, any additional?
Oh, that's fine, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any additional questions on the underlying bill?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Senator Kunish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just sort of curious how you settled on like an annual like renewal or notification instead of maybe extending it to 5 years or what. But I'm just sort of concerned about the the burden on the counties, especially if these are counties that, have for a long time not been interested in pursuing this, and why you would want them to come back annually and not give them a little bit more time.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Kunish. I'd certainly be interested in maybe talking about that. It was interesting. I talked to Mr. Martinson. I don't want to put words in his mouth from the counties, but he would be very supportive of, well, I'd maybe let him say it. He told me that anyway, I think he's told me, that he would be supportive of of the other bill that we had that didn't have this in it, but because of the intricacies of this language that we have in this bill, they were challenged with the bill. So that's kind of, Senator Kunish, where we're at. But, you know, whether we go every 3 years or 5 years, I'm certainly willing to talk about that. I just want to make sure that citizens have a right to be heard in this discussion. I think I mentioned, I represent half of Olmsted County, and I met with those commissioners about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and at the very end of the meeting, I said, Commissioners, I'm going to bring the bill again, and I understand there was some opposition to the bill in this room. I've been told that, but I don't understand it because none of you have talked to me about it. And I said, if anybody has any opposition to this bill yet today, would you please talk to me? And I have yet to be talked to. No one sent the letter to me. They sent it to the committee administrator. So I guess you'd call that group passive-aggressive Minnesota. I'm not sure. But I don't completely understand. But Senator Kunish, I'd be, yes, 3 years, 5 years. I just want to make sure that the citizens have a chance to provide input, because then I think the best science and the best local input is offered. Otherwise, you've got 4 or 5 people on a county board that talk to their neighbor and may not have ever dug into anything.
All right, not seeing any other questions. Senator Drazkowski, you get final word, and then we'll lay the bill over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, 2 other points.
Senator Herr has one question quick. So before your final word, if we can get his question in.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and thank you, Senator Drazkowski, for bringing this forth. And although this may have political implication, but I say regional may be a more into state than it is political. And so I would encourage that since this bill will be laid over, that you have conversation with Senator McCune and, you know, pursue forward. I don't know what the outcome will be. But if it's, you know, have some amendment that, you know, are added to your bipartisan support, make bipartisan stronger, you may have more chance in getting this bill through this time. So I just want to make a statement before Senator Drazkowski conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Herr. Final comments.
Thank you, Senator Herr. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Herr, by the way, the other bill that I'm sending forward, which is just a straight repeal, which is the one we discussed last year, has 5 authors. It's Senator Hochschild, Senator Kupek, and myself, and Senator Eichhorn, and who else? I had one more Democrat. No, I think we have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans on it. So, yeah, this is a bipartisan effort, and we want to make it more bipartisan. 2 things that I didn't mention earlier, and I think Mr. Dorr talked about it. We now have shotguns that are much different than the shotguns we had years ago in 1942. We have long-range, high-powered rifled shotguns today, members, that are making shotguns very much like rifles, shooting deer at 200 and 250 yards, which there's a number of people that won't take that shot at a deer with a rifle many times. Also, if lead in the environment is your concern, these saboted slugs offer about 3 times more lead than a 30-06 round does. And with slugs, as you're hunting with shotgun slugs, often because of the type of hunting you're doing and the approach to hunting, you're actually firing more rounds into the environment with a shotgun than you are with a rifle, which is usually 1 shot. So if that's a concern of yours, this is your bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. With that, Senate File 107 will be laid over for possible inclusion. All right.
Mr. Chair, the other author was Senator Hoffman.
So next up, we'll have, Senator Drazkowski does have another bill, but Senator Hoffman was first in the order, so we'll go back to our original order. So we have Senate File 90 next, which is Senator Hoffman bill on Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities appropriation. I know sometimes we do a lot of legacy stuff all at once. There wasn't a lot of bills in our committee, and I'd like to use some of my time to hear bills, and I know you're very passionate about this subject area, and I love to hear your passion about it. So when I saw that, I thought what a great opportunity to, you know, have some bipartisan in the committee here from members of both caucuses, and so excited to hear what you've got, and go ahead as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I'm going to go back to 1965 and take you on a tour of how the DD Act came to be in the United States, since you want me to tell about the history of it. Okay, my wife said I'm not funny. I won't try to be funny. So, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chair, double chairs. Senate File 90 really provides funding for the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities to continue its archiving work of developmental disabilities in Minnesota. Let me pause there for a second. There was a time when people with disabilities were placed in state institutions, and there was literally nothing about them, about their history, about anything. And when they died in the state institution, they were buried in unmarked graves, except for a little number that the grave had, like you got a number, and there was still some. And it was really sad to see that part of history was kind of like set on a shelf. Dr. Colleen Wick, who's here with me today, is that person for the Minnesota State Department of Minnesota Management and Budget, administration, but she is the director of Minnesota's state council, or the Governor's Council on Disabilities. Each state has a council on disabilities, each state under the DD Act, which was a bipartisan act. Matter of fact, Dave Durenberger, if anybody remembers, speaking of hunters, Dave Durenberger was a hunter, and Tom Harkin from Iowa were really the two people that for the longest time were the only voices in the United States to really talk about how do we get some equalization here? How do we really look at the history of people with disabilities, and not only just the history of it, but what about the future, right? And so when you look at that, Dave Durenberger, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Governor Luther Youngdale, Rudy Perpich, they really said it's important to capture the individual stories, the achievements in the executive branch initiatives, and really look at how this goes back in funding our state. And matter of fact, when 20 years ago, I'm on C Street in Washington, D.C. at a meeting, and here I am amongst a group of people, and our job was to advise and assist the secretaries of the different agencies that were there. And I'm sitting there minding my own business because people were making fun of the fact I'm from Minnesota, and they asked me if I ever seen the movie Fargo. And this person from the Department of Health and Human Services in the Hubert Humphrey building on C Street gets up and starts talking about this person in Minnesota, Dr. Colleen Wick, who established this Partners in Policymaking program that wasn't just the state of Minnesota, but every state in the nation and internationally had picked it up. So it was like, here's the spotlight of Minnesota. And then it was the website. If you go to the Minnesota Governor's DD Council, you can start to see there's an archive. This is what we're talking about here, is an archived website. There's an archival of information about disability in Minnesota that tells the story. And there's some really interesting and remarkable comments that are in there. And so what I really want to let you know then, the council, it's the largest online archive of photos, videos, and reports of any disability-related information, and has won national and international awards regarding their work. Matter of fact, other states use Minnesota's work on doing that. It's an important piece of history we cannot just set on a shelf. Speaking of shelves, Dave Durenberger's wife wrote a book, and it was, they were clearing out this area, and on the shelf was this box of information that actually literally fell on her. And her book is written about those stories that came out of that box. And it's a bit of history I think we should keep telling, because it's something that really motivates my passion. Speaking of my passion, when I was first elected, I was appointed to be the chair of the Governor's DD Council for 4 years, I think, Dr. Wick, and it was absolutely an enjoyable time. And I know the work they do is beyond
just the small amount of money that we're asking from the legacy grant. So with that, I could keep going on and on and on, and I could bring Bob Meyer up here to testify, but I'm not gonna. But I do have Dr. Wick here, who is the executive director of the council, and I just really want to give her some time to really talk about their work. So Dr. Wick.
Thank you, Senator Hoffman. Dr. Wick, just state your name for the record and go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Colleen Wick, W-I-E-C-K, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of Senate File 90, which would provide funding to our council to continue our work in archiving history of developmental disabilities in Minnesota. Our council is federally funded, governor appointed, and it's a group of 25 members. 60% are people with developmental disabilities and family members. We were first established in 1971, and we've been part of the Department of Administration since 1991. The term developmental disabilities refers to people in our state who have the most significant disabilities. And so the disability originates in the developmental period from birth to 22. It results in 3 functional limitations. The ADA uses 1 functional limitation, and these individuals need lifelong support and services. And so 30 years ago, we began archiving, and we created a product called Parallels in Time. And that traces state, national, and international history back to 1500 BC. We use the term parallels in time because history repeats itself. And our history is all about abuse and neglect, injuries, institutionalization, sterilizations, medical experimentation, and death. It's negative history until recently. When the last resident left the Fergus Falls State Hospital in July 2000, we began preserving Minnesota history back to the statehood, 1858. We called this part of our history with an eye to the past. And it's taken unbelievable numbers of years for people with developmental disabilities to have the right to education, 117 years, 123 years for the right to live in a neighborhood, and 153 years for the right to be free from restraint and seclusion. The legislature, we're very grateful for your help, appropriated $55,000 in 2017 and another $50,000 in 2023. And those funds were used to continue all of this effort. And as Senator Hoffman told you, we have the largest repository of developmental disabilities history. And people just donate to us. I'll receive a phone call, and some of you may remember Mel Hecht, H-E-C-K-T, and he said, come to my house. And he had had a health condition, so his wife was helping me, and she kept saying, take more boxes. And so my car was filled with boxes, brought them back to the office, and we archived and we curated all of that history because he had been one of the founding members of the parent movement going back to 1950. We produced a documentary called Hadamar, The Forgotten Holocaust, and Senator Hoffman has often written op-ed pieces about that Holocaust because it occurred before the major Holocaust. People with developmental disabilities were the first to be killed. They were the experimental subjects of carbon monoxide poisoning. We're going to release a new documentary about Governor Luther Youngdahl's period in office from 1948 to 1952 because of his reform efforts. And so we use all sorts of historical resources. And for our 50th anniversary, we created this book called Invisibility. And this was paid for with federal funds. We chose to use, we actually created 3 products, a video, a monograph, and then this book. And we chose a photo book because we have so many constituents who have low reading skills, but they can still understand the story of the book and the evolution of services by just looking at the photos. In terms of reach, we have had 15 million downloaded PDFs from our website since 2018, and 375,000 video views. Our work is used by the University of Minnesota graduate classes, the Smithsonian Institution. During President George W. Bush's administration, we were part of an exhibit at the American Portrait Museum. We've been contacted by both commercial and public television stations. We've had our work used by law schools, continuing legal education courses, and then we have 2 traveling exhibits. Our council has won national and state awards for the preservation of history, and history continues to happen. There is more work to be done, and this request would allow us to continue acquisition of documents, scrapbooks, videos, and add to our digital archives. We could also expand the reach of our traveling exhibits. We do have evaluation methods in place because we use the Baldrige criteria as our framework for quality improvement. And so thank you for your past support, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I don't have any additional testifiers on the list, so we'll go to member questions. I see Senator Green first.
A couple of questions. First of all, Mr. Chair, this is obviously going to be laid over because it's going to have to go in the legacy bill. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator Green.
Okay, then I have a question for either the testifier or Senator Hoffman. Senator Hoffman, have you, I see that you've got numbers in here, 200,000, but it doesn't say where it's coming from. I mean, because Arts Board, I believe, is well, they got a certain amount of money, but the bill that's coming forward this year, they've already gotten their, they've already picked, the bill we're going to be approving is already picked, I believe, right? Is it not?
No, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hoffman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at Mr. Chair's here. That was like the same question, I think, a couple of years ago, and there was money that the Legacy Committee had money in its repository to be able to use for programs like this. So,
Senator Hoffman, I think council might be able to help give us some context as well. Council?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, yes, this would all be part of the batch of bills that we consider under the legacy bills. This would come from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, starting in fiscal years 26 and 27. And right now, the way the fund works, about 47% of that money goes to the Arts Board, and the rest of it, the other 53%, the legislature determines how that is distributed out. So this would be part of the next cycle of the funding of the legacy funds.
Senator Green?
Okay, thank you, because that was my next comment. That would be for the next biennium. I like this, and the reason that I brought it up is because if you were going to get it in right away, I was going to probably try to help you find a place where we could pull the money from somewhere else. But if you're within the legacy funds, but yeah, I think this is a very good use of legacy dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Green. Any additional questions? Not seeing any. I can completely agree with Senator Green. This is, how lucky are we to have the legacy funds to do things like this? This is what I think the kind of thing Minnesotans intended when we had the legacy fund approved. And certainly important work. These are stories that might not get told otherwise. So I certainly appreciate your work on it. And I see you only have one author. If you want, I would certainly be willing to join you and certainly help as well. I'd be more than happy to help Senator Green find something we can swap out to get it in quicker if that's a option. But you do have the last word. So if you do have any final comments, let us know. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and lay it over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll get my staff to send that request into the office. And if Senator Green would like, I need to find $1.5 billion. I don't know if you saw the budget, but since our good friend from the western part of the state is helping out, we could. I know you can, and I love that about you, Steve Green. But Mr. Chairs and members, thank you. This is truly about the legacy and the culture and the aspect of our history in Minnesota. And I mean, what a treasure it is to have Dr. Colleen Wick, part of Minnesota, and I could sit and tell you some stories from 20 years ago when I was in DC and her name was mentioned. It just blew me away, and I had to get back to Minnesota and I had to find this woman and say, hi, I need to know about you. And if you ever want to know the history, go visit Dr. Colleen Wick's office, and there's some really good stuff in there. So, Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for your time and on this. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. With that, Senate File 90 is laid over for possible inclusion. Next up, we have Senator Drazkowski again with Senate File 106. Welcome back to Senator Drazkowski Day in the Environment Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Senate File 106 is in response to a concern that I heard from a constituent, and I see Mr. Sellner is online and he's going to talk to us soon, and I will really rely on him to tell a lot of the story. But I'm reading from a court order here, or a court document. Apparently, Pheasants Forever received some legacy dollars that they used for an easement, and they sent a contractor in to remove a bunch of trees on the property. And not only did they remove a bunch of trees there, but they removed a whole bunch of trees, 250 of them, on Mr. Sellner's mother's property in Brown County. And so what this is an attempt to form out good neighbors with neighbors that are new that might not even have been introduced to their new neighbors yet, so that there's some responsibility that comes forward so that we don't have this type of thing happening with legacy dollars coming in, and the result being that the neighbors to the property end up getting run over in the process. And that's the effort here, members. The bill itself, Section 1 relates to the Outdoor Heritage Fund. Section 2, the Clean Water Fund. Both of them aim to do those 4 objectives there, which include including in the work plan, I believe it's called the work plan, an assessment of the risk of damage, an explanation of how the recipient will seek approval from adjacent property owners to access adjacent land, the date, time, and location of a public meeting at which the recipient will explain the project and hear concerns, and an explanation of how the recipient will ensure that adjacent property owners are reimbursed for any damages caused by the work in an amount sufficient to fully restore the damaged condition and from sources other than the Outdoor Heritage Fund. So that's the bill, Mr. Chair. It attempts to be deliberate in bringing our process to one that says we are going to give these large amounts of legacy dollars to an organization or to a government entity. They need to be a good neighbor to the people that they move in next to, even if they live 100 miles away. That's what we want to do with this bill. I don't know if it's the right language. We'll hear more testimony, but I think it might be good for the committee here for Mr. Sellner.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. And this, again, will be another one that's laid over. So as we can massage the language as the session goes on and hopefully get it right for you. So we do have 3 testifiers. First, we're going to have Eric Sellner. He's online. Second, we'll have Pat Rivers. And third, Tom Johnson. So Pat Rivers, if you get ready. Eric Sellner, unmute yourself. Turn your microphone on. Turn your microphone on. Turn your camera on. And then go ahead and get started. Please state your name for the record to start with.
My name is Eric Sellner, and I thank the committee for allowing me this opportunity to share our story. I'm sorry about my camera. I don't see how this computer is set up, but I'm not getting a picture back to myself if it is on. I need to give you a little bit of history. Back in 2000, my mother went and invested in surveying 80 acres and making sure that it was ready to be deeded over to my brother and myself. In that process, that survey crew had to go out 5 miles to pick up a monument, survey monument, and come back. Around 2016, Brown County did a complete survey for the county, and those markers were within like 3 inches of the GPS equipment. We move into 2018, Pheasants Forever bought 80 acres next to us, or next to my mom. It's still hers, she's got life estate on it. We didn't know too much about it, but we did see that someone else had come in and done survey. So there were new stakes and new pins. And part of it was along our access road because our land was landlocked. And in the purchase of that piece of property, she had gotten a strip of land, 1 rod wide by a 1/4 mile long for access. The problem was you can't drive over a pinhead to go from one section to the other because the road ended up being in section 35. Our land was in section 36. So an easement had been taken to give us a corner of the property that now Pheasants Forever was buying. When they came in to buy it, the lawyers insisted on a quitclaim deed for that parcel that had been used or had an easement on it. My mother paid for it. She got that all brought together. So now we had a complete access that was owned from the county road into the property. That quitclaim deed had to be done in 2019 to consummate the purchase of that land. We go through the winter, and in March of 2020, I go out to see what the accessibility is because the access road we have is a non-maintenance drive. It's basically just a field road. And as I get out there, I'm seeing equipment sitting on the Pheasants Forever property and this tree line that had been against our property line for that road going in was gone. All that was left were 2 small brush piles. I immediately called the sheriff's department because the stakes, the trees were outside of the land that Pheasants Forever had bought. There were a few that some of the root crown would have been shared, but the main part of the tree was in my mom's property. When the sheriff showed up, he said, "I don't know what you expect me to do. There is nothing that we can take forward from this." I said, "I'll look into who's done what and why," but he says, "There's not gonna be any thing pressed forward because the county attorney will not take this as a criminal matter, even though he saw the stakes and the stumps, and that the fact that there were logs and substantial parts of the tree that were gone, there was no way those two little brush piles accounted for the amount of wood that was there. We had to go forward trying to negotiate. Pheasants Forever basically took the lead in a one-man attempt to work with me because we had just stepped into the COVID, or the start of COVID. Even though we were out in the middle of nowhere, it was a one-on-one. And at first we thought we had something agreed to and worked out, negotiated as far as a agreement to replace the fence for security.
Mr. Cunningham, if you'd be able to wrap up in the next minute, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Needless to say, part of our problem here is that we did try to take it into civil court. My mother wiped out her savings, around $48,000. I invested about $56,000 from my own retirement account, and we get it thrown back at us that the judge was going to deny any value for the trees that were taken, even though it was transported off the property. And I've read the letters from your other constituents that responded to this. When they say they want to be good neighbors, I really question that, because the only thing that I saw happen in this is they got what they wanted and wouldn't even compromise with us to regain some of the security that those trees had provided. When you look forward to the situation, if we would have known what was going on and could have been part of the decision-making, I think things could have been avoided. I don't think there would have been this travesty that took place. But when I see Minnesota statutes, there's at least 3 of them out there that say that this is, what they did was criminal, that it was trespass across property line, there was destruction of property, there was removal of property. And we could not be protected by it because we're out in the middle of nowhere, supposedly. It's a travesty, and things like this need to be stopped.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
just for
Cunningham.
further-
We're gonna have to wrap up, Mr. Cunningham, so
One
any
more
final
statement
comment?
The last statement is, I looked into this because I thought it was so bad on how this was handled. But there were 3 other cases that I have seen gone forward because of similar travesties of people going across lines. And even though they were shown as winning, they didn't even recover their court costs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cunningham. We're gonna have to move on now, okay? Mr. Rivers, we have Pat Rivers up next, and then Tom Johnson from PCA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Pat Rivers. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Fish and Wildlife at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. The DNR has concerns about Senate File 106, perhaps most notably requiring public meetings for outdoor heritage-funded restoration and enhancement projects on public lands. These projects, as they stand today, are meeting ecological and community needs effectively, and imposing additional public meeting requirements would hinder their timely progress. We look forward to working with the author on how we can improve restoration and enhancement activities that we feel are already functioning at a very high level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivers. Mr. Johnson. Yeah, just the 3. Welcome back, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and members for the opportunity to testify today. The MPCA, for the record, Tom Johnson, Government Relations with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The MPCA has some small concerns with the bill. Really, it comes down to wording of line 2.20 in the Clean Water Fund section, the will result in or contribute to language. For MPCA's projects that are funded through the Clean Water Fund, they rarely result directly in restoration enhancement work on the land, but it could be interpreted all of the monitoring and sampling work and data gathering that the agency does. Ultimately, in the watershed approach that the state takes, that data does end up in work plans that do result in directly restoration projects on the land. So depending on the interpretation, all of the agency's monitoring and sampling activities that are funded by the Clean Water Fund could be pulled into this, this additional requirements here, which I don't think is the intention. And appreciate the discussion that I had with Senator Drazkowski before the hearing. Looking forward to working with him as the bill moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That concludes our testifiers. If there's questions from members, I have Senator Green and Senator Weisenberg will be second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the bill author, thanks for the bill. I've tried this for a very long time. Your testifier, by the way, got off lucky that he just lost trees. Because I can tell you right now, I can take you to places where there's both legacy and outdoor heritage funds that have been used, where people have had their land flooded. Even today, they're flooding them back. They've lost corners of their buildings to water. And so I really appreciate this bill. But the question, Senator Drazkowski, is did you get, you got one testifier, and should this bill move forward or have another committee stop, do you need some more? Because I got a lot of them.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Green. You know, that's going to be up to the chairs, Senator Green, but I'm certainly open as much testimony as we can to if there's problems in how these legacy dollars are being deployed, and if those folks, not most of them, I think, are probably good neighbors, but we need to make sure all of them are good neighbors, because when they move into a new place or a secure new land, it's possible that they aren't, and that's what happened with Mr. Sellner here. And they went through a court case. Sellner said they spent $110,000 of their money. There were 5 different entities to the court case, they're including Pheasants Forever, government, a contractor, and others. I can't imagine how much money was spent in litigation. We shouldn't have litigation coming out of these things, but I'll take as many as you have.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. And I did get from council quick in between this, it doesn't have to go anywhere else. This is just a layover. So even at a later point, it wouldn't have to go anywhere else. But I think there's definitely time to get some of those other testimonies, and I would love to see those as well. I think it'd be very helpful. Okay. So Senator Green for follow-up.
Well, then I would say if it doesn't make it into the bill, one of us is going to have it as an amendment on the floor, and we'll get those stories out there. But just one comment, because I've heard the comment before from the DNR and other agencies where we'll try to put some restriction on that's helpful to regular citizens that are actually paying the bill. And the comment from the agency is that it's just too erroneous for us and too burdensome. But look at what they're putting these people through when these things go through. And there's never a concern on that. And there's never even an acknowledgement in many cases that they're even doing anything wrong. They just push forward, whether it's trees, bankments that are put up to hold back water, which floods back onto private property. So it's invalid argument to say it's too erroneous for the state to take measures that they're forcing on American Minnesota citizens every year.
Thank you, Senator Green. Senator Weisenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And probably a comment and maybe a question, but I like this. I don't see how it should be a problem just to let your neighbors know you're doing work. It's obviously the government letting someone know they're going to do something. And as you were talking about lawsuits and XYZ, I mean, then now we think about how much did the state, which is taxpayer dollars, the government's not funding it, we are. So now they had to fight a lawsuit. Maybe it would have been easier just to say, well, we'll plant 50 trees, which would have been a lot cheaper to this individual, right? Because that's what it sounds like they wanted, was some trees replaced or something, right? So now we get into this big throwing lots of money away where, well, okay, we'll plant 50 trees for you. And if, you know, whoever did this made a mistake, then they should be held liable, because that is taxpayer dollars. So that is public funds. So this is public, so we should know what's happening. And I've land up north when they log, they say, hey, we're going to be coming through here at some time, and they let me know, right? So I would see this as the same thing. Hey, we're going to be doing some work. Can we talk? Maybe if it's not public, maybe just the landowner and the agency who's ever doing it, at least get together so they know what's going on. So I like this bill.
Thank you, Senator Weisenberg. Next up, Senator Herr.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a comment, and you know, when I look at this bill, I thought, you know, although I sympathize Mr. Sellner, and you know, I'd like to see some fairness, but I'm a little concerned that this seemed to be more like a particular project, and we may open a can of worms that, you know, causing more problem further. That's just my immediate thought right now. And I hear Senator Green mention about there may be number of situation like this in our state, and I think we may have a complaint agency that I'd like to suggest that maybe voice your your concern to DNR or complaint agency, or, you know, Office of let's see, our AOL, OLA, Office of Legislative Auditors. You know, so to I would say to compile, you know, a larger legislation that could apply to our state. That's just my point now. But I see the staff of Outdoor Heritage, LaSalle Sam, in the audience here, Mr. Mark Johnson, and I'd like to call Mr. Johnson for his statement on regard to the bill.
Mr. Johnson, I know you weren't prepared to testify, but if you would like to come up and answer the question, we would certainly welcome you. Welcome to the committee. I know it's been a little bit, but just state your name for the record and whatever Senator Herr's question is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for the LaSalle Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. Mr. Chair and members, I became aware of this bill 2 days ago, I guess it was, and started looking into it, trying to figure out what was the impetus behind it. And as I went through, I did find there's a lot more to the story than we heard today. And I think maybe more than the senator here is aware. First of all, just from the bill itself, I cannot respond to you on behalf of the council, because the council, the LaSalle Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, has not reviewed this bill nor discussed this bill or made any decisions on what they think. I can only give you my impressions from an administrative standpoint of staff. And with that, looking at it, there are a couple of things that stick out to me. One is that the expenses will be raised significantly for any group that uses the funds for restoration, enhancement, or enhancement or restoration. The other thing is it would severely slow down the process of using the funds, so that would, again, increase expenses in another way. And I think that was also pointed out in some of the testimony letters. The other thing is that I do have court documents. There were 250 trees removed. 75 of those were within this adjacent 1 rod wide fee acquisition access that Mr. Sellner owned. Those were Siberian elm, and the court, through the lawsuits, the court decided, and I have the court finding it, that those were of diminutive value, meaning they diminished the value of the property rather than added to the value of the property. So just for the record, for your information, there's a lot more to it. There was a lot of, and I have 29 pages of emails back and forth between Pheasants Forever, the DNR, and Mr. Sellner. There was an extensive amount, as it appears, of back and forth, asking how can we remedy this? Can we provide trees? We will put up new fencing we will put new fencing and gate for you and trees. We will, Pheasants Forever also offered to restore prairie grasses, whatever in that corridor for him. There's also a neighbor that was involved in the lawsuit as a third party, and not because he was added by Pheasants Forever or the DNR. So there's a lot more to the story, and before you go further, I would suggest that everybody look at the entire story. And I don't say this lightly, because I always, whenever I find out that there's any kind of, whenever staff finds out there's any kind of disruption with an outdoor heritage funding project, we try to look at that in depth to find out what's going on. Is there something that happened wrongly? And if so, was it corrected? Were we good neighbors? So, Mr. Chair, and members, that's my thoughts for you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Senator Hur, does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, that does answer. You know, just to clarify what I was saying earlier, and earlier I was just making my personal point of view, and then I noticed Mr. Director Mark Johnson in the audience, so it's relate to something that he knows. So I just thought I'd invite him forward to explain, so that the community, everyone in the community are aware, and so it's also on the record. So I don't have any particular question to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Senator Hur. Senator Wiesenberg would like to make a quick comment, then we'll go back to you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this isn't to diminish anything you said, and there's always two sides of the story, so we need to hear everything else. But I did, I took note of like the Siberian elm, and I know the court said it's not of value, but we also have to, take into account that someone, like a property owner, might not know what they are. So they lost some trees and they're frustrated with it. So just because the court said it's a Siberian elm, which is, an invasive, they might not have known that. So that is still of some value to that person. That's all I'm saying about that. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to mention that should the senator wish to have us included in some dialogue on this in the future, I'm certainly willing to help in any way.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Yeah, again, the path for this is to lay it over, so we got lots of time to continue to talk about it, so hopefully you guys are able to do so. Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, I have a quick question. Perhaps you can answer, or perhaps Senator Hur. How many projects are funded through this program, and what's the average cost of each project? And then I have a follow-up.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair and Senator, there's approximately 50 to 50, in the low 50s for projects each year. But those are actually programs. So within each one of those, it may be a one-shot standalone project, or there may be 50 or 100 of these smaller projects that can happen. In fact, many more of them, it's the larger amount. There's lots of small projects within each program. Average price, the lowest is $500,000 on an appropriation from the Outdoor Heritage Council, or 500,000. Yes, and up. I'm sorry. Yeah, correct. I've got some sign language from Senator Lang, who's on the council, so he's a great resource for you as well as Senator.
Sorry, I didn't know.
No, and but this was a CPL project, and there are hundreds of CPL projects each, or well over 100 CPL, Conservation Partner Legacy, small grant projects that come out of the Outdoor Heritage Fund each year. And those are all under $500,000, somewhere between $5,000 and $500,000 in value, or in costs, I should say. So each project has its own budget, and each project is defined in its own right.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Johnson. As much as I'd love to see an opportunity for consultants to get rich and have an overabundance of work, I'm really worried about this. When we consider that it's very difficult to complete a risk assessment that would have any value or any legitimacy, that would take some hours of work as well as holding a public hearing. I just think this is extremely burdensome. Coming from that line of work, an hourly rate for a consultant is over $100 an hour. And so even having one public meeting might cost an applicant or somebody who's putting forth a project $1,000. I mean, this is really burdensome. So I don't like this. I do have a lot of experience with adjacent landowners. I know what a rod length is. Anybody else? 33. No, 16 and a half. Anyway, so this is something I'm really familiar with, and of course I have sympathy for adjacent homeowners and property owners, absolutely, but I'm sorry, I would like just to state my opposition in that this would be quite burdensome for nonprofits and other grant recipients. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, are there any other questions from members? Not seeing any final comments, Senator Drazkowski?
Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members for the discussion. I'm certainly willing to work with Mr. Johnson and others to work to develop this in a language that will help us ensure that recipients of these are a good neighbor. At least we can make sure they get their phone numbers, maybe to start or something. But we need, I think, more than that. We need to ensure that these types of things don't happen again. $110,000 for a lawsuit just from one party, that doesn't include everything. That's not what we want to be doing with the money from Legacy. I don't think anybody who voted for it or who was an activist for it to begin with expected that we would have these types of things happen from the deployment of the funds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again for all the testimony and discussion today. With that, Senate File 106 is laid over for possible inclusion. With that, the last item on our agenda is going to be the OLA report on aggregate resources. Welcome, OLA. Thank you for coming to our committee and being patient with us today. We're excited to hear what you've got to share with us, so just go ahead as soon as you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members, for having me here today. For the record, my name is Jody Munson Rodriguez, and I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. Thank you for having me here today to talk about our limited review on aggregate resources. Just for a little bit of background, this was something that the Legislative Audit Commission directed us to do in 2023. It was designed to be a very small kind of limited review in which we looked at the implementations of recommendations from a 2018 task force. So that's what I'll be going over today. I'll try to kind of buzz through this since I know we don't have a lot of time, and hopefully save a couple of minutes for some questions at the end. And now my computer is freezing. Go. All right, so very quickly, some of the key findings I wanted to share with you all. First is that since the 1980s, policymakers have convened a number of task forces to address issues related to aggregates. You can see on pages 11 and 12 of our report, it should be in your packets, looks like this. On pages 11 and 12, we have a brief timeline of activities that we looked at. In reviewing the work of these several task forces and committees, we found that these groups have made similar recommendations over the years related to planning, protecting, and mapping of aggregate resources. And most recently in 2018, a legislative aggregate resources task force released a report with several recommendations for the legislature, the Department of Natural Resources, and local governments. We list those recommendations in Appendix A at the back of our report. Overall, our finding is that little has been done to implement most of those recommendations from 2018. So I'm going to give you just kind of a really brief overview of aggregate resources, go over a few of those key task force recommendations, and kind of what we found related to activity around those recommendations. So as you may know, several factors drive the interest in planning for the protection and use of aggregate resources in Minnesota, a few of which I've listed on this slide. Public and private sectors rely on the availability of aggregates for building public roads, bridges, private residential facilities, commercial projects, kind of everything. They are important to the state's economy. In 2022, Minnesota produced an estimated 54 metric tons of sand and gravel valued at about $350 million, and an additional 8 million metric tons of crushed stone valued at about $100 million. Now, aggregates are a non-renewable resource, and as such, their availability is declining due to depletion, but also development, natural scarcity, and other factors. Another thing that we wanted to note is that aggregates are heavy and used in large volumes, so they are very expensive to transport over long distances. They're often used in public infrastructure projects, and so that cost to transport is often borne by taxpayers. Transporting aggregates also increases wear and tear on roadways, and it can negatively affect air quality through emissions. Now, for those reasons, it's generally preferable to source aggregates near where they'll be used. However, we noted that planning for the protection and use of aggregates is complicated by the fact that there is no central agency that oversees aggregate mining here in Minnesota. Federal, state, local governments all may play a part in permitting or zoning the areas in which mining may occur. Now, state law does have a few provisions related to protection and planning for the use of aggregates. One law requires the Department of Natural Resources to map aggregates in outstate Minnesota. The law excluded the 7-county Twin Cities area because that area was mapped separately in 1983 before that law was passed. Another law requires the 7-county Twin Cities area counties in that area, to create comprehensive land use plans that include goals and priorities concerning aggregates. No such law applies to the counties in outstate Minnesota. Now, much of the control over aggregate mining and protection is in the hands of local governments. So, for example, local governments may create zoning ordinances, or they may require permits in a way to regulate the use of land under their jurisdiction. They may also have requirements around reclamation activities. So now I'm going to go over a few recommendations related to each of these points I just brought up. The first of which has to do with funding for mapping. So this 2018 task force recommended that the legislature fund DNR's mapping program, which is tasked with identifying aggregate resources across the state, at $950,000 per year for a 10-year period. This would have enabled DNR to map approximately 6 counties per year and complete the mapping within 10-year period. However, as we show on page 14 of our report, where we talk about legislative funding, the legislature has appropriated less than 20% of the recommended funding for this activity. Now, as I said, DNR estimated that they would be able to complete about 6 county maps per year with the recommended funding. What we found, as shown in this chart, is that between 2018 and 2023, they completed a total of only 4. As you can see in the chart, DNR's Aggregate Resources Mapping Program completed mapping for only 23 counties between 1984 and 2023. Another task force recommendation was for local governments to evaluate how their comprehensive land use plans affect access to aggregate resources. Now, since many of the task force recommendations were directed to local governments, we reached out to county planning and zoning administrators across the state to learn about any actions they've taken since this task force recommendations were published. We received responses from 83 of the 87 counties. And according to our survey, while most administrators said that their counties have comprehensive land plans, or land use plans. Just over half reported that those plans have provisions related to aggregate resources. It's difficult to imagine that the plans have an impact on aggregate access if they don't address aggregates. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, state law does require the Twin Cities counties plans to contain provisions for aggregates, protection, and use. Even so, 2 of those counties reported that they did not have these provisions. Another task force recommendation was that local governments should evaluate how their land use designations and easements affect access to aggregate resources. As I noted earlier, local governments can designate how land can be used through zoning ordinances, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. In our survey, nearly all county administrators reported having zoning ordinances, but only 4 reported that their county prohibits development on lands identified as having aggregate resources. Now, absent such a prohibition, counties would likely not have the authority to deny development on top of aggregate deposits. In addition to, or instead of establishing zoning ordinances, local governments may choose to use permits for specific uses, such as aggregate mining. Under state law, local governments may issue conditional use or interim use permits. Now, both types of permits impose restrictions related to potential issues with mining, such as noise or operation hours, dust, those types of things. But these 2 types of permits are different in that the conditional use permits stay with the land if it is sold, while interim use permits have an ending kind of time, either a date or if that land is sold. Now, the task force recommended that possible changes to conditional use and interim use permits related to aggregates be studied. Now, as shown here, the majority of counties reported requiring conditional use or interim use permits for new aggregate mining operations, but we were unable to identify any studies conducted on their impact since the 2018 recommendations were made. As I said, trying to be brief, I'm going to go over 2 more recommendations really quickly. They have to do with reclamation. If you're not familiar with the term, it's the process of preparing a former mining site for its next use. It can be regrading a site that has steep slopes. It can involve revegetation, that type of thing. Now, the task force recommended that permit issuers emphasize planning and reclamation during the permitting process. The task force also recommended that DNR's reclamation handbook be updated using a portion of the increased funding recommended by the task force. What we found is that most counties, 64, reported that they require new aggregate mining operations to submit reclamation plans. However, I'll note that fewer, 42, require a financial guarantee to ensure reclamation occurs. And we found that DNR has not updated the handbook that it was published in 1992. So, unusual, I know, for an OLA report, we do not offer recommendations since we were asked to look into the recommendations of another entity. However, we do provide a conclusion that this is something that's been looked into. There are recommendations for you to take a look at. And if the legislature is interested in planning for the use and protection of aggregate resources, it should consider implementing the 2018 task force recommendations that are directed at the legislature and provide greater support and direction to local governments for implementation of recommendations directed at them. And with that, I am done with my presentation. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you. I guess I have one question for the presenter. If the DNR is required to map or required to identify aggregates, why aren't they doing, or how would they have the money to do that? Is it part of their budget, or will it require a separate appropriation? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. It is not a line item within DNR's budget for this program. This program is within their minerals division, which already has a number of other requirements that it is required to fulfill. Most of the funding that was used to complete this mapping came from the Minerals Coordinating Commission suggestions to the legislature or recommendations from the legislature. So we have, I think, a chart on page, apologize. I think on page 16 of our report, you can see where some of that funding came from. Once the legislature largely stopped funding the Minerals Coordinating Commission, work on the maps largely stopped. That just restarted again when there was some money from the Environmental Trust Fund directed towards that activity in the last few years. I will note that DNR did note that they've been able to redirect some money to this activity in the last few years, but at this point, they have noted that they only have 2.25 FTE, and in order to move forward with the program at the pace at which this recommendation states, they would need to have at least 6.
Thank you, Senator Johnson-Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to emphasize this is a huge problem, and it's been a problem for decades within the construction industry. So the reason that we need to map aggregates is because if a county or city doesn't know where their aggregate resources are, they could approve a housing development or some other type of development on top of it. This has happened over and over again where we have really great aggregates, but now they're only accessible to us as construction professionals if we tear down people's houses. So, I mean, it is a huge problem. This is, I mean, I'm looking at all of you who represent districts that are not in the metro area. It's a big problem in the metro area, but we have a large source of recycled aggregates that we can access. In the outstate, greater Minnesota areas, we do not. And so if you want to build roads or schools, I mean, concrete is made up of aggregate, whether you're talking about asphalt concrete or Portland cement concrete. If you want to build things, you must have aggregate. And if you don't have aggregate locally, you must pay for it to be hauled, and it significantly increases the cost of any construction item. So just be aware, I'm going to be offering a bill to fund this mapping. The mapping is really important because, again, if we don't know where the aggregate is, zoning commissions, et cetera, may approve projects that make it inaccessible. So I know aggregate's kind of a boring thing, no offense, but it is a really important thing for the economy that we have access to good aggregate resources. Thanks for letting me offer that comment. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you get the bill to do the mapping, I'd be happy to join you. Before we take more questions, we do have one individual signed up to also testify on this, Mr. John Cunningham. Welcome to the committee. Just state your name for the record and go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. John Cunningham, Aggregate and Ready Mix Association of Minnesota, also known as ARM of Minnesota. We represent the industry that produces the aggregates in concrete as well. So thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the OLA's report on aggregate resources. I'd also like to thank those legislators that brought this issue forward, along with the staff and the participants in the review conducted by OLA. It's something that we've needed. We need more attention on this, and I appreciate Senator Johnson's comments also that on the importance of this matter. So I'm hoping that we do shed a little bit more light on why this is so important and where we're at today. We're in a critical state. So I do have some comments prepared, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. For those that may not be aware, we're facing a critical issue that could drastically inhibit our ability to be able to address things like climate change, affordable housing, maintenance of our infrastructure, and much, much more. About 2/3 of every yard of concrete, every cubic yard of concrete, is aggregates, 2/3 of it. With asphalt, that's about 90% of that ton is aggregates. Aggregates are in nearly everything that we build. As Senator Johnson pointed out, aggregates are everywhere, and we need them for almost everything. Accessing sources of aggregates as close as possible to their ultimate use is essential in our ability to keep the costs down and to minimize emissions. As noted in the OLA review, transport is a major component of both cost and emissions associated with production of construction aggregates. Because emissions are relatively low for the production part of it, for the mining part of it, transport, on the other hand, we're transporting a very heavy and bulky material, and that has the result of more emissions and more fuel consumption and more cost. So that is the biggest component when we get into longer hauls. Therefore, it's in the best interest of every community to have access to construction aggregates as close as possible to their local communities and to the ultimate use. I'd like to call your attention to 3 important points raised in the OLA review. First, the review notes a Minnesota Geological Survey inventory of aggregate resources in the 7-county metro area. That's on pages 13 and 14, I believe. That was completed in the year 2000. And then second, I'd like to emphasize the review that it spotlights the recommendations of the legislatively directed Aggregate Resources Task Force that was completed in 2018. And then third, the review documents the lack of adequate funding for the Department of Natural Resources Aggregate Mapping Program. And I'm sorry I misspoke, the pages are 3 and 4 of the OLA review. You'll see that the 2000 MGS review, inventory was conducted, and that included the 7-county metro area. The inventory gathered data on development, resulting consumption of aggregates, and accessibility of aggregates in the area. The resulting projection is that the metro area would exhaust its aggregate resources in the year 2029. So in less than 5 years, it's projected that we will not have construction aggregates in the metro area. Now, you may think that that only impacts the metro, but it absolutely does not, because that means that we're shipping those materials, trucking those materials in to where we would need them, and that means that they're leaving those other communities. So this is a critical issue. We need to know where we're at in the metro area, and we need to update that inventory. ARM has been requesting, and we continue to request an update of that 2000 inventory, and we would encourage the legislature to fund an update as soon as possible. We need to know where we actually stand today, and then we can effectively plan for the future. The second thing I'd emphasize from that review is that the Aggregate Resources Task Force recommendations have not been substantially implemented. As the OLA points out, there are 7 recommendations put forward by the task force, and to a great extent, they have not been addressed. We are doing aggregate mapping, and we're very thankful that the DNR engages in that, and we're thankful for their effort. But they do not have the resources to do that on the kind of scale that we need. We need to do that much more quickly than we're able to do right now. So ARM supports the efforts to implement the remaining recommendations, and we would work actively to assist in that implementation. Finally, one of the recommendations noted in the OLA report and in the ARTF report is the lack of funding for DNR's aggregate mapping program. They have a backlog of work. If you look at that review, it shows that they have far more requests from counties than they do have the ability to meet those. And the way the DNR handles that right now, my understanding is that the county must request it. They request it by resolution, and then the DNR puts them on the list to be addressed. And so as the DNR is able to map, they move down that list, but the list is far greater than what they're able to address, and that we need to address with funding. So I hope you'll take this study to heart, and if there's anything that we can do to assist, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your testimony, and I'm sure you'll be seeing some legislation forthcoming about several of these recommendations. So do we have any additional questions for either of our testifiers? Not seeing any. Thank you again for all the good work the Office of the Legislative Auditor does. Thanks for sticking with us today and giving us this dive. I know you're available to us if we have more questions going forward and as we develop the legislation, but all of us really appreciate the work you guys do. So thanks again for coming. With that, there's no other business to come before this committee today, so with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.